Your kids could get free or low-cost health coverage from Medicaid or CHIP. Even if you've applied before, they may be eligible now. Kids up to age 19 are covered for checkups, vaccines, dentist visits, hospital care, and more. And if they already have Medicaid or CHIP, remember to renew every year. Visit insurekidsnow.gov or call 877-KIDS-NOW. Paid for by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
In a city known for live music and hipster intellectuals,
he is so hot. He's so hot.
One young genius will be given the chance of a lifetime.
He knows karate. Ooh. And ancient Greek.
Ooh. Kinky.
Whatever you say, Cappy.
And he's going to find out that guarding sorority houses is not for the faint of heart.
Oh, shit.
Who is it?
It's the fucking Tridelt house again. Okay, well, was it dead when they threw it in, or did it drown in the pool?
But this is not your typical security company.
You'll like it here. They have a good chef.
Nah, man. I'm cool. I don't eat food I don't make myself.
You'd be amazed what one person will put in another person's food, you know?
I know that's right.
These are not your usual security guards.
So it says here on your application that you are currently a...
Demonologist.
Okay. Demonology.
Demonology.
And that's...
It's the study of the demon realm.
Oh, yeah, the demon realm.
The realm of demons.
Yeah, okay. Welcome to the Zimco family. Or the Zimco realm, I should say.
How about we don't make fun of the demons?
Oh, of course. All right, here's your W-4 form.
And he is not your typical boss.
Here's to Mag. That filthy old hag. That slippery, slimy slut. Taxation is theft.
He's on a mission to protect and serve a campus gone wild.
Yeah, okay, but was it dead when they threw it in? Or did it drown in the pool?
Some of them break under the pressure.
What did he say after he took his shirt off?
He said, I quit and or I'm fired.
So he said something to the effect of, I quit or I'm fired.
No, he literally said, I quit and or I'm fired.
Yeah, he said it that way. I remember it specifically. He was a fucking weirdo.
And some became the monsters they once feared.
Please, Dr. LeCornu. Have you no heart?
Begone, brokey. You must pay for my precious serum like everyone else. And make me rich, ha ha ha.
Well, then you leave me no choice. Bird in hell, Dr. LeCornu.
Did he just kill you?
I guess so.
Nothing can prepare you for Sorority Security Guard.
Okay, so was it already dead when they threw it in? Or did it drown in the pool? Well, hopefully that makes you want to stay and watch the movie, as the trailer suggested. I was a security guard almost continuously from 1997 to 2003. 6 years, with the exception of that one summer I spent in Italy, covered at length in another series of episodes. I worked for 2 different security companies. The first company I worked for, and my first love in the private security field, was Zimco Security Consultants. And within about a year or 18 months of starting as a guard, I moved up to a supervisor position for Zimco, and then hired on to the next company when Zimco folded, and we'll talk about why that happened. It was a very colorful story that ended the reign of Zimco Security Consultants. And of course, we'll talk about that in part 2 of this series. Before I start with that fateful day that I walked into Ron's office to apply for a job with Zimco, I should take a moment to set the scene and explain what the context was, what was I doing, when was this, why was I there, and all such as that. When I was a young person, I always enjoyed school, especially in elementary school and middle school. I liked being out of the house. I liked being around other people. I liked learning new things. Of course, as school progressed, I felt like I was learning less and less per minute. So I ended up missing valedictorian at my high school by 1,000th of a grade point. I was okay with that. I figure I didn't deserve to be valedictorian anyway because I didn't work very hard. My senior year, I missed so much school that I had to go spend Saturdays in the library to meet the state attendance requirements. And when I was in school, I was usually in the band hall, practicing taekwondo sparring or playing Metallica songs on the drum set that my friend Ronnie had set up. The tuition for my first 2 years at UT was paid for by an academic scholarship. However, it didn't quite cover the total amount I needed for the dorm, the meal plan in particular, and books, and things like that. So I stayed behind in Winnie for a year, and I worked 60 hours a week at a local McDonald's to save up the money. Now, I'm fully aware that this is a financial feat that would be nearly impossible now. This is definitely a moment where I am glad that I came of age in an era where a young guy who's just willing to do dirty work and go out there and get tired and maybe even risk some injury. I feel terrible for young people now because I'm not sure how I would have succeeded in this day and age. So that's what I did, and this was 1994, the same year that Pulp Fiction came out. So I started the Plan 2 program in 1995 with a little bit of cash that I had saved up. And Plan 2 is not a normal degree program, so you have to choose a concentration instead of a major because you pretty much have to just do their curriculum and they make you take all kinds of stuff. The first year I concentrated on radio, television, and film. So for a year I was an RTF major and hung out with a lot of wannabe Hollywood types. Back then, of course, everybody wanted to be Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez. Those were the 2 hot properties at the time. And of course, Robert Rodriguez had graduated UT Film School, so he was the golden boy. And if that sounds very stereotypical for someone of my age coming to Austin in the mid-90s, well, you're exactly right. I was very typical. Even having come from a cowboy town where bootcut Wranglers and Garth Brooks shirts were all the rage, I showed up, of course, wearing my jeans or my jean shorts, very long jean shorts, my combat boots, and my plaid flannel over a t-shirt, maybe some more plaid flannel on top of that, and then more plaid flannel. And my hair was super long, down between my shoulder blades, trying to evoke a Chris Cornell vibe, I guess. And the dormitory that I worked very hard to pay for was the famous, or infamous, I know it's supposed to be infamous, but I'm a big fan of the Three Amigos. The infamous Jester Dormitory. It's known for being a very minimalist, prison-esque type dorm. Seems to be reserved mainly for freshmen of limited financial means. But they had a decent cafeteria and a good meal plan. I figured that was the main thing I needed. So every day I had the same breakfast: plain bagel, cream cheese, eggs of some kind, hash browns, cranberry juice, coffee with cream. Lots of that. And I never liked sugar in coffee. But when I wasn't in a study room or the communal showers or the laundry room, I was stuck in my tiny dorm room. I've seen larger jail cells than the dorm room I had in Jester. And in Jester, you always had one roommate. And when the beds were pulled out from the walls fully, so that you could actually sleep in them instead of just sitting on them, you could reach out and the two roommates could touch each other's hands from either side of the room. And these are bare, painted cinder block walls and a little window that won't open. So tensions can rise. When you're living in Jester, the identity of your roommate is very important. So, who were my roommates? I had 3 different roommates because I was in Jester for 3 years. I didn't get time off for good behavior. Of the 3 roommates I had, the first 2 I did not get along with, and we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about my 3rd and final roommate, who was by far my favorite, and he had a hand in the story that we're telling today. So this leads us to my first roommate. In the summer of 1995, I got a letter from Jester Dormitory informing me of who my roommate was going to be for my first year. And he was a Korean immigrant student named Jun Kang. And being from Texas and going to the University of Texas, when you find out that your roommate is Korean, you statistically are going to guess that they grew up in Houston or Dallas and their family probably has money. But it turns out that Jun Kang actually didn't set foot in the United States till he was about 19. The English that he learned was mostly learned academically in Korea. And he came from a family of very limited means. The pressure was really on him to succeed and make good grades, and his family hated the fact that he was a film major. Asian students generally, due to cultural reasons, as I'm sure we've all seen, tend to stick to very lucrative degree programs, finance, STEM, that sort of thing. Usually don't do philosophy, art history, or in Jun's case, radio, television, film. So Jun Kang was also a very devout Christian. When you live with someone this closely, you can say that with real certainty. I would come home to my dorm and I'd open the door and I would find Jun on his knees praying with his head touching the foot of his bed. And I want to watch Jerry Springer and reheat a burrito or something, but I sit quietly and read until he's done. He was a respectful guy too. And let me go ahead and say that we didn't get along day to day, but we respected each other, and I have a lot of affection for this guy. We had our arguments, but he was a very decent person. He really just wanted to learn how to create art that would make people think about the world and each other in more positive ways. It's hard to hate someone for having that goal. He had his own Bible study group and recruited other students, and if they missed a class or an activity, he would have them meet him at 5:30 a.m. at the track to run laps. And he was running with them, right there with them, so he was no hypocrite. He agonized over how to find a girlfriend, and of course for him, the goal was a wife immediately, to have a traditional family, because Jun's family was conservative by Korean standards. Half of his family was actually from the mountains of North Korea. So, had a bit of a grim, rigid outlook. He was terrified when his parents would call, because they would have questions about his grades and that sort of thing. When my mother called, I think it was a pretty typical American experience. She mainly just wanted to know how I was doing. Was I eating okay? Was I getting enough sleep? All that kind of thing. I'm sure she may have wanted to ask me, are you drinking too much? But I wasn't at the time. I had to learn how to study. I didn't know how to really buckle down and force myself to learn something because, the requirements in high school were a little less rigid. And now I'm being thrown into the fire with these maniac professors who, I'll give you an example. There was a lecture before the midterm, and one of the nervous freshmen in the front row asked for clarification about, what kind of answer did they want to this particular question if it were asked on the final. And the professor looks at them like they're dumb, and in front of the whole class says, I expect brilliance. And if you can't give me that, at least give me competence. And of course, that was annoying then, it's annoying now. That kind of thing will always be annoying. So June was a C.S. Lewis style Christian. So a very open-minded one. His way of expressing his religious commitment was to engage with people rather than talk at them about what he believed. And because of his seriousness and his closeness to traditional Korean culture, I noticed that the other American Korean students would come to him for advice. It was an interesting thing. He was seen as almost an elder among the Korean students. So while he was peddling C.S. Lewis, I was peddling Nietzsche. So we argued about every single issue. Back then, I would tend to take the ugliest, most brutally logical, cold-blooded, materialist, atheist, borderline nihilist position. At the time, the movie I was most excited about was Reservoir Dogs. Meanwhile, June's favorite movie of all time was Brazil by Terry Gilliam. Now, Brazil is great. I mean, it's a wildly imaginative, Baroque story about a dystopian 1984-style society in the near future. Terry Gilliam is the artist and writer-director who worked with Monty Python. And he also did a very, I thought, disturbing and sad movie called The Fisher King, starring who else? Robin Williams. Who else does disturbing and sad better than Robin Williams? The score to that movie, you can get online and on YouTube and look up the theme to Brazil. And it's this awesome, happy, jaunty, tropical kind of tune. But of course, that happy tone is ironically connected to a movie about an oppressive government that tortures people and gets involved in mind control. Sounds familiar. So June wrote screenplays. He also wrote theatrical plays. And he worked with a theater group that would actually put on his plays as small productions. They were short one-act plays, small casts, minimal sets. He had been working for weeks furiously on a script, and he hadn't told me much about it, but when he finished it and he started going to rehearsals for it, he mentioned that he'd like for me to come see it, me along with my girlfriend. So I said, sure. So it was around 7 o'clock on a Wednesday in one of the auditorium-style rooms that are empty in one of the newer, larger buildings. We go there, we get our seat, and it turns out that it's a play that's also an infomercial. It's a fake infomercial and we're kind of in the studio audience. My roommate June is just sitting in the audience. Normally he plays characters in his own screenplays, but he just seemed to be sitting there. There was a character that came out that appeared to be the main character, and he was the scientist who had created a serum that made people happy, that gave them hope. It was the best, most hopeful feeling in the world. And this scientist created this serum and then became a billionaire by forcing people to pay exorbitant prices for it. And so this is an infomercial where he's basically showing off how happy he is and how happy you can be on his serum. If only you weren't poor. If only you had enough cash to be happy. Now, the name of this wonderful human being is Dr. LeCornu. Now, I'm no doctor, but LeCornu is my last name. So the villain of this play is named Dr. LeCornu, and he was just terrible. I'm not a fan of this guy. There was sort of an intermission in the show, in the commercial, and June gets up and walks up on the stage and tries to talk to Dr. LeCornu and explain to him that he's just been having a hard time in his life and he needs just a little bit of the serum just to keep him going. He knows he can get a job, he can get back on his feet. He could do without the serum eventually, but he just needs a little bit. Dr. LeCornu, please, if you could just help me out. But of course, Dr. LeCornu is just a complete asshole, and he's not having it. He doesn't give an F. So Dr. LeCornu tells him, look, the price is the price, yo, or something to that effect. Then when Dr. LeCornu turns around to walk away, June's character reaches into his members-only jacket pocket and pulls out what looks like a .38 pistol, but hopefully is a cap gun, aims it at the back of Dr. LeCornu's head, and yells out, "Dr. LeCornu!" Pulls the trigger. Bang! All the lights go out. Shocked silence. And at that point, my girlfriend leans over to me and says, "Did he just kill you?" And all I could think was, yeah, guess he did. So at that point, I began to suspect that June and I had some unresolved issues, although I think maybe it was just cathartic. So I guess when I said I had positive feelings about June, it didn't seem to be mutual. I think his emotional impression of me was probably a mixed bag. June moved out of Jester after the first year. He moved to an apartment off campus. I wonder if I drove him to that. It was a big expenditure for him to go to an apartment, much less so than now, but again, he was not here on financial aid like I was, but he was definitely on a budget. So, June, if you're out there, if you hear this, sorry for being an asshole. But one thing you need to know, June, your successor, Oscar, may have been just the karmic punishment that I deserved. So the first thing to mention about Oscar is that if you opened the closet on his side of the room, no, it was not B.O. He actually had very good grooming. That was not an issue at all. He was actually a lot more meticulous than me. For example, back then I was always clean shaven, and I didn't use aftershave. I just used rubbing alcohol. Didn't leave any scent, and, well, you definitely never got any kind of little bumps. It kept everything very clear there. Killed all the germs. The burning is how you know it's working. Now, back to Oscar's closet. What was in that closet? Not Oscar. He had a charming girlfriend, Patty. But Oscar's closet would smell like the dankiest, stankiest head shop in Jamaica in July. It gave you a headache. And so Oscar definitely had a connection. I didn't partake in that. Obviously, it was all over the place. I figured I really didn't need to mess with my memory or motivation at that point in my life. Not to mention it was, it's strange to say, it was more illegal then than it is now. The laws surrounding marijuana use or cannabis use have been uneven, to choose a word, in Austin for years now. I worked a property on dirty 6th Street, and on the camera system, I saw somebody light up what looked like a cigarette. It caught my eye because of when you light up a cigarette, when a camera is on its infrared setting, it looks really bright. And so I noticed that this person was smoking on a back staircase near a rear exit, and it was clear that they thought that they weren't going to be seen. So I watched them, and I noticed that they had a giant bag of something. So I just wanted to go back there and see what was going on. It's not illegal for a person to smoke a cigarette, but if they were sitting on our back steps and they didn't have any business here, then, of course, I'd want to see what was going on. But as soon as I opened the back door, this person looked and saw what vaguely appeared to be a police uniform. Of course, you know, the rent-a-cops, we dress like cops on purpose to trick people into thinking we have actual authority to do anything, but we don't. So this person making that mistake sees the toy badge and the flashlight and the navy polyester and bolts. But unfortunately, he left a giant gallon freezer bag full of pretty dense-looking buds. So here I am in a parking lot on 6th Street with literally a gallon of weed under my arm, and I just happened to see an Austin Police Department cruiser slowing down nearby. So I flagged them down, walk up to the cruiser, they rolled their window down, and I show them the gallon of weed, and I say, somebody dropped this in the parking lot before they ran off. What should I do with this? And both cops in the cruiser looked at me like I was crazy and annoying. And one of them said, I don't know, what do you want us to do about it? And then they rolled their windows up and drove off. So given a lot of the legal and policy-based risks involved with this situation, I did what seems wasteful but was probably prudent, and I just threw it in the dumpster. I'm not gonna... There's no locker that I can catalog it in back at the precinct. Well, my roommate Oscar was definitely up on all the cannabis laws in the state at the time. He was a pre-law student, after all. His goal was to become a civil rights attorney and fight the government. I looked him up years after graduating, and he actually did do that, so more power to him. He's definitely a poster child for heavy cannabis use not destroying your academic career, because I figure his grades were probably a little better than mine, actually. Oscar was also a card-carrying communist. Next time you think somebody, is a Marxist or leans left, yeah, I got you beat. I lived with someone who paid dues and had met with the local campus Bolsheviks from time to time. He was very, very much into counterculture on everything. Anything rogue or artistic or anything that challenged the system. And my thought was, constantly when I talked to him, was, dude, we are the system. What are you talking about? Yeah, we're at the bottom of it, but we're here at a major university. You're working on a law degree, and you're saying that we're rebels outside the system? Whatever. We went out to a few things. He and his girlfriend and me and my girlfriend went to see a few folk musicians that he clued me into. I never got into folk music. In fact, at the time, I had definitely wandered into more classic rock or punk, and not just grunge, not just Nirvana like I was in high school. I do credit him with cluing me into and having me watch a few movies by a Chilean director named Alejandro Jodorowsky. He was born and raised in Chile, but he's of Jewish European ancestry. He made a movie called El Topo, which was very famous. They are famously non-linear artistic films that don't make a lot of literal sense and are very critical of any kind of structures in society. And of course, that was right up Oscar's alley. I would say the most interesting night that I had, thanks to Oscar, was one time we went to a tiny theater on campus late at night to watch a projection of an original print of Ralph Bakshi's Fritz the Cat. Now, Fritz the Cat is an animated film that was first released in 1972, and it was rated X. So it's an animated film that ended up with an X rating. Now, at the time in the 1970s, the X rating was designed for films that had real artistic merit, but they wanted to make sure that no one under 18 could legally enter. So if you rated something R, like say The Godfather came out in 1972, it was rated R. What that meant was, if I'm 7 years old, I can still see The Godfather in the theater if my parent lets me in. So because so many parents were just bringing their kids to whatever, they invented X that way to let the parents know, no, seriously, don't bring your kids to this. So that's really what X originally meant. And that's why Triple X started later on, because then they needed a designation to say, okay, no, this doesn't just mean not for kids. This is just straight up porn. And so Fritz the Cat definitely had sexual content, but it wasn't Triple X. A lot of the reason it was rated X was it condoning violence against police. The sexual content was a lot of cartoon boobs and cringy talk about getting one's kicks. I'd love to play for you some sound clips from it to give you a sense of how disjointed the movie is, but I'll just read a quote that sums up the vibe of the movie, and you can check it out if you want to. One perceptive critic referred to it as a surreal, vivid movie that doesn't have a connected story, but is full of clever satire of the 1960s with sex, drugs, violence, and profanity. The animation is top-notch, and some scenes have a rough, psychedelic feel. Well, they're definitely right about that. One convenient thing is sometimes what one person calls, quote, psychedelic, another person might just say, oh, that just doesn't make sense, I see. Well, one thing about having Oscar as a roommate, and also the fact that my girlfriend moved out of Jester wisely and moved in with 4 other female roommates far away from campus in a nice new apartment building. They were building a lot of those back then. It was the kind of apartment building that had a rec center and a pool and beautiful landscaping and tall ceilings and a balcony. So needless to say, instead of hanging out in my prison cell with my cellie, Oscar, arguing about tax policies, maybe it'd be more fun to take the bus off campus and go stay with my girlfriend and her roommates. All but one of her roommates were Vietnamese, so there were some interesting cultural lessons being learned. So, my girlfriend's roommates taught us an ancient secret known only to Asian people. An ancient secret known only to Asian people. They told us that when you go to parties with Asian students, you can tell how lit the party is by how red everyone's face is. When you go to a party that's primarily Asian students, you can tell how lit the party is by how red everyone's face is. And being from Southeast Texas, and thus having partied with literally 0 Vietnamese, Chinese, or Korean people, I was amazed to find out she was exactly right. So at one of the parties where I was trying to get my face red also, I raised my hands up, way up over my head to say something really loud that I thought for sure everyone would be super interested in, and the bottle of Budweiser I was holding in my hand came in contact with the blades of a local ceiling fan, thus flinging beer all over everyone and breaking the bottle when it hit the floor. We weren't asked to leave immediately after that, but we got close. We still left soon after that. I'm a showman by nature, and so I wanted to leave on a high note, you know? Always leave them wanting more. That's my motto. And now we come to everyone's favorite roommate, Jason. Jason was a communications major from Houston. He looked up to me in a weird way because I was already a junior and he was just a freshman. But he was a super sharp, friendly guy, and we got along immediately. I saw him as a kind of breath of fresh air because he's coming in from Houston, from clearly a very contemporary, connected, pro-social scene. And so at that point, I was very much walled into campus culture and going to these little debates and strange hole-in-the-wall clubs, and I had completely become disconnected from real life. And Jason was full of real life. That's what I liked about him. He was about 6'3", and he was a bodybuilder. He worked out twice a day, 6 days a week, and he ate 6 times a day. His goal was 8,000 calories a day. He had just arrived in Austin before moving in, and somehow he already had a girlfriend whose parents were from Romania. Everyone just automatically assumed she was a model. Jason looked like he could crush your skull with one hand. But, like a lot of men like that, he was like the nicest, sweetest, most polite guy I knew at the time. He was an oasis of courtesy and normalcy after my first 2 roommates. There were 2 things Jason and I loved doing together. And no, it's not what you're thinking. The tea isn't that good here, folks. No, we're just watching stuff on our little tiny cheap CRT dorm room TV with dorm cable. So that's like 20 channels. Pretty good. Including the local Austin Cable Access channel with the brand new show by some guy named Alex Jones. But Jason and I loved watching Pumping Iron, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. We'd watch that maybe once a month. Then we'd watch Jerry Springer almost every day. We had to get our Jerry in. We were Jerry junkies. Jerry, Jerry, Jerry. If any of you guys are unfamiliar with Jerry Springer, please go to YouTube and just type in Jerry Springer and you'll see what kind of entertainment Jason and I were in for. Jason didn't come from money, but his family seemed to be helping out quite a bit. But he still got jobs as a bouncer to earn extra money. He worked mostly at bars and strip clubs because he looked very impressive in a tight white t-shirt. And Jason influenced me in a lot of ways. It's funny, the one roommate that had no interest in influencing me turned out to have the biggest influence on me. Jason got financially creative, not because he was poor. In fact, he made pretty good money as a bouncer when he worked at what was the biggest strip club in Austin at the time. Strip clubs were big things in the 90s. I think they're becoming a relic of the past now. But Jason was still poor, and one reason I suspected that he was poor for 2 reasons. One reason I suspected and one reason I confirmed. The one cause for his poverty that I suspected was his Romanian model girlfriend. I think just keeping up with her and going out with her kept his wallet empty. And then the other thing that was draining his bank account was his bodybuilding addiction. In other words, food. He had a lot of trouble affording 8,000 calories a day as a poor student. I mean, he had to stay above 6,000 minimum, and he had to maintain a kidney failure risking level of protein intake all day. And so one afternoon, Jason comes back into the dorm room from a trip to H-E-B, the local grocery store. So here Jason is with a few things he could afford in 2 big bags. And among these items was a big bag of a dozen frozen chicken breasts, the real cheap kind that have filler in them. Jason just needed digestible protein, that's it. And a big bottle of Hershey's chocolate syrup. So I'm sitting there on my dorm futon on my side of the room, and I see him take 6 of these chicken breasts from the bag and put them on a plate and then put them in the microwave. He heats them up, then he picks up our one shared knife from the floor and chops up the chicken into little pieces. And then, you guessed it, there's no Shyamalan-style twist here, folks. He poured that chocolate sauce right over the chicken breasts. So we start watching Jerry Springer. And meanwhile, by the way, there is a 99% chance that I had some kind of final the next morning or a paper I hadn't even started, but I'm not going to miss Jerry Springer. And remember, we have a VHS player that doesn't record, and we just have those few dorm cable channels, so while we're watching Jerry Springer, I look over and I see Jason eating this big pile of chunky gray slop. And I'm thinking to myself, that's fucking awesome. So I started working out with Jason, not 6 days a week. My academic requirements had me in the library till 4 a.m. routinely trying to get reading done. The amount of reading that was required was absurd, just impossible. And back then, everything was on paper. When you did research, you were in the stacks, meaning in the musty old giant rooms full of old books. You were hoping that no one had raided that section of the best books for the research project that had been assigned in some big class, with 70 students trying to research the same obscure subject all at the same time, and there's no internet. So I worked out with Jason about 3 times a week, and only once a day. The thing about bodybuilding is people would think, well, the commitment that you make that really works is the commitment to lift heavy weights and, have veins pushing out of your forehead because you're putting in so much effort. It's really all about just sleep and nutrition, because if you go in there, put in a huge amount of effort, tear your muscles up, but you don't do the proper follow through, then you'll never get the size that Jason was looking for. And he had a tailor's measurement tape that he would wrap around his biceps or his thighs occasionally to track his progress in a little notepad that he kept. So my progress was limited. I didn't become as jacked as Jason. And I'm only 5'10". I'm almost 5'11". 5'11" in formal shoes, I'll put it that way. So I didn't have just the raw size that Jason had, but my personal style started to change. After all, this was 1997. Nirvana was getting a little old there. Reservoir Dogs was not the coolest movie anymore. So I started hanging out more with a different scene, and this scene overlapped with a band that I hooked up with briefly. Back before hooking up meant that I had sex with them. I didn't. I just played a few gigs with them. This was 1997, so hooked up didn't have a sexual connotation at the time. And before I knew it, I went from drinking Budweiser to Heineken. So my douchebag quotient was starting to increase. Instead of long hair, I opted for a buzz cut, chopped everything off, got a simple gold earring. I went from loose flannel to black spandex t-shirts, from baggy jean shorts to tight white jeans, black combat boots, absurdly thick black leather belts. Remember those big, thick black leather industrial belts from the 90s? So I was moving up in the world socially. I thought I was pretty cool. But everybody's cool and fun until they run out of money. Okay, well, in our next episode, we'll talk about the next steps that I took to start earning money. There were some detours along the way before I landed with my first security job. Like a lot of young people, I monetized what youth gave me because I didn't have a lucrative skill. And what did youth give me? Well, an unusual amount of nervous energy, an ability to go without sleep, and a sometimes intimidating appearance. I learned that keeping people safe has very little to do with muscles and weapons. It turns out security is mostly a mind game. But more on all that later. Keep an eye out for the next episode and maybe another musical recap. See you then.